The night had a quiet kind of beauty, the kind that whispered through the windows and filled the house with stillness. The world outside was wrapped in soft moonlight, and a thin layer of fog drifted over the empty street. Inside, the clock ticked gently, each second stretching longer than the one before. Emma Carter sat by her living room window, wrapped in a faded wool blanket that had once belonged to her mother. The light from a single lamp fell across her face, catching the silver strands in her brown hair. A half-finished cup of tea rested beside her, now cold. Untouched, it was past midnight, but sleep had never come easily these days. The quietness of her home was comforting, yet heavy, as if the walls themselves remembered laughter that no longer lived there. Her son, Daniel, had moved to the city 2 years ago. She was proud of him, proud of the man he'd become, the independence he'd found. But some nights pride wasn't enough to fill the silence. Some nights all she wanted was to hear his voice calling from upstairs, the way he used to when he was little. Emma took a deep breath, watching the faint reflection of her face in the dark window pane. She looked calm, maybe even content, but beneath that still surface lived a quiet ache, the kind that only love and time could create. She didn't talk about it much, not even to her friends. They called her strong, graceful, endlessly patient. They didn't see the moments when she reached for her phone just to stare at old messages, or the way she lingered by the hallway mirror before turning off the lights, wondering if life still held surprises for someone like her. Once upon a time, she had dreams, not grand ones, but tender, quiet dreams. She wanted a life filled with warmth, laughter, and a little bit of adventure. And though she had known love, she also knew loss. Her husband had passed away when Daniel was still in high school. Since then, Emma had learned how to smile again, how to live again, but she never quite learned how to stop missing the sound of someone breathing beside her in the dark. Tonight, the ache was stronger than usual. Perhaps it was the music. She had left an old jazz record spinning softly on the player. The saxophone wept in the background, slow, haunting, full of feeling. Emma leaned her head against the window, eyes half closed, and let herself drift into the rhythm. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, then steadied. A lone car passed by, its headlights slicing through the fog before disappearing into the night. The world was asleep, but Emma's thoughts wandered restlessly to the past. To her son, to the small hopes she kept hidden behind polite smiles. She thought about calling Daniel, just to hear his voice, just to say goodnight. But she didn't. He was busy, she told herself. He had a life now, a good job, good friends, someone he might even be in love with. She didn't want to be the kind of mother who called too often, the kind who couldn't let go. Still, she whispered softly into the quiet, "I miss you, sweetheart." The sound of her own voice startled her. It was tender, cracked with emotion. For a moment she imagined Daniel standing there, his easy grin, his tired eyes, the way he'd laugh when she tried to fuss over him. The image brought both comfort and a gentle ache. The night deepened. The clock struck 1. The house creaked as it settled, the familiar sound of old wood shifting in the cool air. Emma rose from her chair and turned off the lamp. The darkness felt softer than the light. She made her way upstairs, her footsteps quiet on the carpeted stairs in her bedroom. She paused by the doorway. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale silver stripes across the bedspread. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from remembering, something you can't quite let go of. As she slipped beneath the covers, she let her thoughts wander, not toward sadness, but toward something gentler. Maybe tomorrow she would bake Daniel's favorite muffins and send them to him. Maybe she would visit the bookstore she used to go to with her husband, just to see if the same man still worked there, and maybe, she thought, life still had small miracles tucked inside ordinary nights. Her eyes fluttered closed, and the quiet filled with the soft hum of the night, the hum of a life still moving, still waiting, still hoping. But just as she began to drift toward sleep, a faint sound broke the silence. A knock, soft, hesitant. From her bedroom door, Emma's eyes opened slowly. Her breath caught in her throat. At first she thought she must be dreaming. But then the knock came again, slightly louder this time, still, gentle. But real. Her heart began to race. Who could be knocking at this hour? She rose carefully, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor. The air in the room felt charged with something unspoken, not fear. Not exactly, but something between disbelief and longing. The clock read 12:04. She took a breath, reached for the doorknob, and whispered to herself, who could that be? At midnight. For a long moment, Emma stood frozen by the door, her heart thudding softly in the dark. That midnight knock still echoed in her mind, even though the sound had faded. But before she could make sense of it, before she could decide whether to open the door, her mind drifted not to the present, but to a place her heart had kept quietly hidden for years. Memories, like the gentle hum of a lullaby, began to stir. It was spring. She remembered the way sunlight used to spill through the front porch of her old home. How the scent of blooming lilacs filled the air. She had been in her late 20s then, full of plans and dreams she couldn't quite name. That was when she met Michael. He wasn't anyone extraordinary at first glance, tall, soft-spoken, with a kind smile that always seemed to linger a moment too long. He worked at the small library in town, a place Emma visited almost every Saturday. She had gone there one afternoon, holding a stack of borrowed books, her mind preoccupied with errands and lists and everything ordinary. But then she heard a voice, low, warm, and gentle, ask, looking for something new or something familiar. She turned, and there he was. Michael had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, yet somehow filled the room. There was calmness in him, an ease that made her feel seen without having to say a word. They talked about books at first. Simple conversations that somehow stretched longer each time she visited. He'd recommend a novel. She'd return the next week to tell him what she thought. Sometimes they'd share quiet laughter over forgotten authors or argue lightly over favorite endings. What began as casual conversations slowly turned into something else, a rhythm, a shared space that neither of them named but both understood. Emma often wondered when exactly admiration turned into affection. Maybe it was the day she saw him helping an elderly woman find her late husband's favorite book, or the afternoon he stopped by her bakery, the one she had just opened, then pretending to need coffee but really just wanting to see her smile. Whatever it was, it had grown quietly, beautifully, like ivy climbing a sunlit wall. Life, of course, had its own plans. Michael was offered a position in another city, a rare opportunity he couldn't turn down. He told her one rainy afternoon, his eyes both excited and uncertain. Emma remembered the way the rain had tapped against the glass that day, steady and soft. She had smiled, told him she was happy for him, that he deserved it. And she meant it. But behind her smile, her heart trembled. They promised to stay in touch. They wrote letters for a while, real handwritten letters filled with little stories about their days. He'd tell her about the new library, the children who came in wide-eyed and curious. She'd write about her growing bakery, the scent of cinnamon in the mornings, the loyal customers who reminded her of him. But time has a way of fading even the brightest ink. The letters came less often. Then, one day, they simply stopped. There was no falling out, no harsh words, just the quiet distance that sometimes grows when life moves in different directions. Still, even years later, Emma could remember his voice, calm, thoughtful, always kind. She could still see the way he used to tilt his head slightly when he listened, as if every word she said mattered. Sometimes she wondered if he ever thought of her when he walked past a bakery or when he saw a book she once mentioned. But she never allowed the thought to linger too long. Some memories, she believed, were meant to be cherished, not chased. The clock ticked again in the present. Pulling her back, Emma sat down at the edge of her bed, her fingers lightly brushing the old wooden frame. A part of her heart still carried the warmth of those days, not as longing, but as gratitude. She had known love once, gentle, quiet, and pure, the kind that didn't burn but glowed softly, leaving behind light long after it was gone. Maybe that was why she still believed in connection, why she still hoped her son would find someone who made him feel that same kind of peace. Her eyes lifted to the window. The moon had shifted, its light spilling in silver ribbons across the floor. Somewhere beyond the fog, the world kept moving, lives intertwining, hearts finding and losing one another in endless rhythm. And even though her story had been marked by distance and time, Emma felt something stir, a small quiet truth she had almost forgotten. Love, she thought, doesn't always end. Sometimes it simply changes the way it stays with you. A soft sound interrupted her thoughts again. This time, the knock was clearer. Real, present. Her pulse quickened. She stood slowly, the floor cool beneath her feet as she reached for the door once more. She whispered, half to herself, half to the memory that lingered, Michael. Or Daniel. The handle turned beneath her trembling hand. The door creaked softly as Emma turned the knob. Her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. The hallway light flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the floor. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then she saw him, Daniel, her son, standing there in the half-light, his hair damp from the misty night air, its expression uncertain but tender. "Mom," he whispered, voice low, almost childlike. "I didn't mean to scare you." Emma's heart swelled with relief and surprise all at once. "Daniel, what on earth are you doing here? It's past midnight." He smiled faintly, though his eyes carried a weight she hadn't seen before. "I just needed to come home tonight." She stepped aside, her voice softening. "Come in, sweetheart." The warmth of the living room welcomed them like an old friend. Emma lit a small lamp, and the golden light fell over familiar corners. The family photos, the worn armchair, the blanket she always kept folded neatly on the couch. Daniel looked around, exhaling slowly. "It hasn't changed," he said quietly. "It feels like everything's the same." Emma smiled, sitting beside him. "Some things don't need to change. They just wait for us to come back." For a moment, they said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full of things they didn't yet know how to say. Finally, Emma spoke. "You look tired. Are you okay?" Daniel nodded, then shook his head, a nervous laugh slipping out. "I don't even know how to answer that." He looked down at his hands. I was driving back from work and suddenly felt this tool. Like I needed to talk to someone who knows me better than I know myself." Emma's eyes softened. "That's still me, then." He looked up, smiling faintly. "Always." The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Emma rose, poured them both tea, and returned with 2 steaming cups. They sat together, the quiet hum of the house around them, the clock marking gentle seconds between words. Daniel finally sighed. "I told you I messed things up with Lily. It's been hard. I keep replaying everything I said, wondering if I could have done it differently." Emma nodded, her voice calm and warm. "You care deeply. That's not a mistake. But love needs honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it just takes time for both people to understand what they really want." Daniel stared into his cup, the tea swirling like slow-moving thoughts. "It's strange," he said softly. "I thought love was supposed to be easy when it's real." Emma smiled gently. "It's real because it's not easy, because it makes you grow. It teaches you patience, kindness, and forgiveness for yourself and for others." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," she said with a small laugh. "But the heart has its own way of finding peace." As the conversation flowed, the tension slowly eased. They began to talk not just about Lily, but about life, about the bakery Emma once dreamed of reopening, about Daniel's work, about the little things that made them both feel alive. Emma noticed the way he listened, really listened the same way Michael once did. That calm focus, that quiet warmth. And for a fleeting moment, she felt as though the past and present had softly merged. The rhythm of their talk felt like music, gentle, unhurried. "Do you remember," Daniel asked, "how Dad used to leave us little notes in the kitchen? The ones that always said something silly like, 'Don't forget to smile'?" Emma's eyes glistened. "He believed smiles could fix everything." Daniel smiled back. Maybe he wasn't wrong. She reached over and placed her hand over his, the same way she had when he was a boy. "You know," she said softly, He'd be proud of you. Not for being perfect, but for caring so deeply. That's what makes you like him." The warmth in her voice filled the room. Daniel squeezed her hand, the silence between them turning into something gentle and understood. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The night that had begun with uncertainty now felt safe, almost sacred. At one point, Daniel rose to look out the window. The fog outside had lifted, and the moon shone brighter, clear and steady. "It's beautiful tonight," he said. Emma joined him, standing side by side. "It is. Maybe it was waiting for us to notice." He looked at her then, and for the first time in a long while, there was peace in his eyes. "I'm glad I came home." She smiled, her heart full. "So am I." They stood there quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't need words. The past, all its joys, its heartaches, its unfinished stories felt like it had finally settled into its place. Emma realized that love, in all its forms, was still alive in her home. Not just the love of a mother or a memory, but the love that comes from simply being there for someone again and again, no matter how much time has passed. When Daniel finally went upstairs to rest, Emma lingered by the window a little longer. The world outside was still, but inside her, something had changed. Something soft and steady had begun to glow again. The knock that had startled her hours ago had, in its own way, opened more than a door. It had reopened her heart to the quiet beauty of connection, the kind that lasts through years, distance, and even silence. She whispered a quiet thank you to the night, her voice barely a breath, and somewhere deep inside, the past that once echoed in her heart finally found its peace. Morning arrived softly. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching the old wooden floors with a faint golden glow. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. That comforting mix of new beginnings and memory. Emma stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. The house felt different this morning, lighter, as if it had exhaled after a long, silent breath. She looked out the window toward the garden. The roses had bloomed early that year, their petals heavy with dew. She smiled to herself. They had been her husband's favorite flowers. From upstairs came the faint sound of footsteps. Daniel appeared a moment later, dressed in the same clothes from last night. Hair tousled, eyes clearer than before. "Morning." "Mom," he said with a quiet smile. "Morning." "Sweetheart," she replied, sliding a cup toward him. "You still take your coffee black?" He chuckled. "Some habits don't change." They sat together at the kitchen table, the same one that had held countless breakfasts, birthdays, and late-night talks over the years. The silence between them was gentle, filled with unspoken gratitude for what the night had restored. After a few sips, Daniel leaned back and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "I almost didn't come last night." Emma tilted her head. "What made you change your mind?" He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I was driving past the old library, the one you used to take me to. It's still there, though it looks smaller now." He smiled faintly. "I remembered how you'd sit with a book in your lap, waiting for Dad, or sometimes just watching the rain through the window. I don't know why, but that memory, it made me want to come home." Emma felt her throat tighten. "That's a lovely reason." Daniel's gaze softened. "I guess I realized something last night about Lily, about everything. I've been so afraid of losing people that I keep my heart guarded. But you never did. Even after Dad passed, you kept loving. You never shut the world out." Emma's eyes glistened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "I had my days," she admitted softly. "But love doesn't stop when someone leaves. It just changes shape. It becomes quieter, maybe, but it's still there." He nodded, understanding. "That's what I want to learn. How to love like that without fear." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You already are, Daniel. Coming here, opening up, that's what courage looks like. Love isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to stay open even after you do." For a long while, they sat like that, mother and son, two hearts quietly mending through honesty and time. Later, They stepped outside into the morning air. The fog had lifted completely, revealing a sky washed clean and blue. Birds moved through the branches, their songs filling the space between silence and peace. Daniel walked slowly through the garden, touching a rose petal with care. "You still take good care of them," he said. "I try," Emma replied with a small smile. "Your father used to say they were proof that beauty and thorns can exist together." He smiled. "That sounds like him." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by sunlight and the faint scent of roses. Then, quietly, Daniel said, "I think I need to talk to Lily again. Not to fix things right away, but to tell her the truth that I still care. That I'm not afraid to wait." Emma nodded, her heart full. "Then do that. And whatever happens, no, you'll be all right." He turned to her. "And you? Are you all right, Mom?" Emma looked around at the house, the garden, the morning light dancing across the flowers, and then back at her son. "For the first time in a long while," she said softly, "yes, I think I am." When Daniel finally left that afternoon, he hugged her longer than he had in years. "I'll call you soon," he promised. "I'll hold you to that." She replied with a smile. She stood on the porch long after his car disappeared down the road, the echo of the engine fading into the calm hum of the neighborhood. The breeze lifted her hair gently, carrying with it the scent of lilacs, faint but unmistakable. Emma closed her eyes, letting the moment settle into her heart. There was no grand ending, no sudden miracle. Just peace, quiet, genuine peace. She went back inside and sat by the window, the same place where her story had begun. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again, filled with traces of laughter, forgiveness, and a love that had taken on a softer, steadier form as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to amber. Emma whispered a simple truth to herself, one she would never forget. Love doesn't end when people leave. It lives in the spaces they've touched, in every word, every memory, every quiet act of care that continues long after. The clock ticked softly in the background, marking not the end, but the continuation of life, slower, wiser, and still open to the next small miracle waiting quietly beyond the door.